Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Netflix is still on fire. Paid subscribers increasing 23% year over year in the last quarter of the year. Global demand, the big driver. We'll talk to someone who thinks Netflix needs to keep digging in for the edge over its competitors. Could Netflix ads, gaming, or even audio be the way? Plus, chair of the Federal Communications Commission, Ajit Pai, steps down on the day of the inauguration. Pai took a controversial stance on net neutrality and leaves his successor with some thorny issues around the power of social media companies like Facebook and Twitter. He joins us for his exit interview. And with President-elect Biden poised to take office, what regulation awaits tech giants under a new administration? And with the potential for more violence, what security measures are being taken at the Capitol and across the country? All those stories in a moment, but first we mentioned Netflix kicking off the tech earnings calendar today with a favorable report after the close. During the trading day, we saw U.S. markets getting a boost from tech gains and small caps as well. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta has the full picture. Kriti, walk us through the day.
Well, let's just kick it off with Netflix. You're seeing those shares surge in the post-market. A lot of that coming after they reported 8.5 million subscribers, beating not only Wall Street's estimates, but even its own goal. Shows like Bridgerton and The Queen's Gambit really behind that move. And you're also seeing some of its peers trade in sympathy. Disney, Roku also up after hours, and that could help with some of the broader index moves tomorrow. Let's just talk about what happened today, though. We did see the SOX index close at a record high. Qualcomm, the leader in that index, also hitting a record high. And even in the major benchmarks, big tech outperforming once again. You see that with the NASDAQ and the New York FANG index as well. But the top performer, both in the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ, was Microsoft. Flip up the boards and you'll see that Microsoft and General Motors both gaining quite a bit. This is after news that the two companies partnered up in a $2 billion investment round in Cruise, a self-driving startup majority owned by GM. So once again, Emily, we know that the EV space is very hot. And that brings me to our last ticker here, the Global Autonomous Electric Vehicles ETF, ticker DRIV. This rising and ending the day at session highs, even as Janet Yellen in her congressional testimony talked about EV as an arena in which Chinese companies and the U.S. can both compete. Remember, China is a leader in electrification. So to talk about the U.S. competing in that space, extremely important. But the big story for Tuesday was absolutely those Netflix gains, Emily.
Absolutely. All right, Kriti Gupta, thank you so much for that roundup. We're going to talk about those gains now. Netflix ending its biggest year in company history with a bang, adding more customers than expected and saying it no longer needs to borrow money to continue to build its entertainment empire. The company passed the 200 million subscriber mark for the first time. And with $8.2 billion in cash, Netflix said it no longer needs external financing. To discuss, we're joined by Andre Swanston of TrueOptic. Andre, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, Netflix surpassing expectations yet again. What are you reading between the lines here?
Look, I think, I said this last time we spoke about it, that Netflix has done better than I think many people thought in terms of adapting to a few things. One, the competition from Disney and AT&T and others, to international expansion, which is something they invested heavily in a few years ago and is really starting to reap the benefits of now. And then lastly, their content slate wasn't as disrupted as Hollywood and others in terms of COVID and have to stop production. And so those things I think have really helped it propel, as well as just the macro growth in over the top and streaming over the last year, which has been tremendous.
Now, Netflix is saying it's going to deliver more than 70 movies alone this year. That's not counting television. That is not counting other titles. How much of an advantage is this over the competition at a time when production has been stalled and, restarting in fits and starts for so long?
So I think it's a huge advantage in terms of their core competency, which is really, distribution and production company for streaming video content. I mean, so their core, they're showing that they can really flex the muscles and their investments and all the money that they've put towards it over the last few years is really going to reap benefits. I think on the flip side, the concern that I would have is that, Netflix came in by being the company that was innovative and forward-looking and took behemoths like Blockbuster pretty much out of business. If you think about it, though, the last 2 or 3 years, what have they really innovated in? They're competing against these multinational media companies that have multiple revenue streams, not just video, but they have gaming, they have audio, they have operating platforms. And my concern would be is Netflix just becoming so focused, even though they're being really good, can they be kind of outflanked by these media companies that have much more of a diverse offering, podcasting, audio, and ways to monetize clients? So, are they going to make any investments or acquisitions or innovate internally?
Now, it's an interesting case you make that Netflix hasn't done something truly radical in a few years, but I believe executives would push back on that and say 70 plus movies in a single year. Isn't that pretty radical?
I mean, Blockbuster probably would have said in the late 1990s that they bought, 10,000 titles that year compared to, 5,000 the year before. I don't know that just doing more of your core competency can be considered innovation. At the same time, no one can debate how well they've been able to execute. And they've made the right call in terms of when many people thought they were overspending. They've shown in terms of content, original content production, they've shown that's been kind of their savior and helped them fend off competition. So, who am I to doubt their strategy? I'm just saying in terms of their ability to engage and monetize the 200 million subscribers that they have, they are now just going after a very limited portion of the connected media pie. A lot of the growth in terms of the macro ecosystem over the last 18 months has been in audio, even more so than connected TV. And then most people, and myself being one of them, believe that over the next 3 to 4 years, the majority of the rapid growth is going to be in gaming. And these are two avenues where the Disneys and the AT&Ts and the Sonys and others are legitimate players in, and Netflix is not.
So what do you think's most likely? I mean, how likely is it that they introduce advertising or get into gaming or get into audio?
Well, they've said that they don't see themselves getting into advertising in the foreseeable future. I mean, if you look at the success that solutions like Pluto TV and Zumo and Tubi, all of which over the last 18 months have been acquired by huge media companies and have additional content coming online. There is, in certain international markets as well, that the SVOD subscription-based solution is just not as viable. And even if you look into some of Netflix numbers, certain markets, they're not getting that massive growth. I do think that turning on free ad-supported, particularly with their huge original library for older seasons, could be a huge opportunity. I mean, the real advantages that Netflix always had were three things, right? So they had more content available for streaming than anybody else. Even with the 70 new shows and everything coming out, there's massive libraries coming into streaming from NBC Universal and Disney and others. They had better distribution, meaning that the Netflix app was available on more platforms, from Roku to Apple TV to Fire TV. Everybody's catching up with the distribution. And then they had cheaper pricing as compared to cable. All of these streaming solutions have preferable pricing to cable. So, I just think some of the core that they have are not sustainable, even though they're running an amazing business.
All right, True Optics, Andre Swanston, thanks so much, Andre, for giving it to us straight. Netflix, we're going to be listening in to the call. Also, they're saying they've got some exciting news about Bridgerton coming up later this week, their new smash hit, so we'll be following that as well. Okay, coming up, his departure would leave the FCC at a 2-2 partisan deadlock until the Senate confirms another member. FCC Chair Ajit Pai joins us next to talk about what's next for him and the U.S. Communications Commission and their policies after inauguration. And we are monitoring the start of a solemn event at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. President-elect Joe Biden attending a memorial for the 400,000 Americans who have died of COVID-19. There's expected to be a moment of silence later this hour. We'll bring you that. The servants will be marked by 400 lights at the reflecting pool. And of course, tomorrow, President-elect Biden will take the presidential oath of office. He has long pledged 100 million vaccines to mark his first 100 days in office. We'll leave you with this shot of the Washington Monument at sunset. This is Bloomberg. The United States is just a day away from having a new administration under President-elect Joe Biden. One of the many changes that will come with it is the appointment of a new head of the FCC as Chair Ajit Pai makes his departure. He joins us now to discuss what is next for him and the agency in a sort of exit interview. Chairman Pai, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking with you over the years. You are chair for just a few more hours. What's next for you after that?
So still going to have to figure out what the next adventure is. I haven't made any plans yet, but I'm hopeful that it will be just as intellectually stimulating and rewarding as the past 4 years have been. It's been the ride of a lifetime in this position, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
Well, certainly the new FCC or the reconstituted FCC will be taking on a full plate of issues, not the least of which is Section 230. You know, what do you believe are the big issues that are going to define the next tenure of the FCC?
Well, I think the current FCC has laid a very strong foundation on some of the core issues that the next agency will have to tackle. For example, our work to close the digital divide, getting millions more Americans access to the internet. Our work to promote American leadership in 5G, including finishing last week the largest spectrum auction in American history of the C-band. Working to protect consumers on everything from robocalls to establishing 988 as a 3-digit number for suicide prevention and mental health. And also just continuing to transform how the agency operates. You know, we've made it more transparent, more bipartisan than ever before, and I'm hopeful that the next FCC will as well. And as I told our team, I hope for their success. I'll be rooting for them from afar because the next FCC success will be America's success, and we're all in it together.
Now, you decided a couple of weeks ago not to move forward with a proposal to limit the liability shield and to take any action on Section 230 as requested by President Trump, and it's been quite an eventful couple of weeks. What is your reaction to Facebook suspending the president indefinitely, to Twitter banning the president permanently?
Well, I think it highlights two different issues. The first is transparency. Back in 2017, I made a speech in which I pointed out that a lot of these social media platforms don't have any transparency into how they make decisions about what consumers see or can say, who makes those decisions, et cetera. Those concerns have only been accentuated in recent weeks. The second thing is consistency. Obviously, if people are going to make these decisions who operate these social media platforms, why do they make some decisions and not apply that principle elsewhere? So I pointed out, for example, last summer, why does the supreme leader of Iran get to tweet out threats to the Israeli state, among others, and not face any consequences in terms of violations of terms of service? That's something that the next FCC, the next Congress will be thinking about.
That said, you've said there is bipartisan consensus for some change to Section 230. What changes do you suggest?
Well, obviously, President-elect Biden has campaigned repeatedly on the full repeal of Section 230, but I think many in Congress are looking for more tailored revisions. One of the things that we were looking at, for example, at the FCC was what is the proper scope of the immunity provision within Section 230? That's something that the next Congress may take a look at. They may take a look at other parts of Section 230 as well, but I think it's going to be important for them to, of course, go through the legislative process, hold hearings, call in witnesses, engage in deliberations to figure out whether and to what extent this provision should be amended. There are obviously a lot of puts and takes, and there could be some unintended consequences. So they're going to need to think through very carefully what those changes should be.
So how far do you think the government should go when it comes to regulating private companies? Even though these companies have huge global influence and impact, they are still private companies.
Well, I've consistently said that under current law, the FCC does not have the authority to directly regulate how these social media companies operate. But what I have said is that everybody in the internet economy, it could be an internet service provider, or it could be a tech giant like Twitter or Facebook, everybody should operate under a consistent level of regulation in terms of transparency and things like that. And I think if we had those basic rules of the road, a lot of the sting and uncertainty in this debate could simply vanish because you would have, everyone would know where things stood. But as things stand now, again, we don't have the transparency that a lot of consumers expect, and that's generating a lot of questions about how these decisions are being made here and around the world, by the way.
Now, your decision on net neutrality, as we've talked about in the past, was probably the most controversial and maybe challenging decision that you ever made. And a new administration, a new FCC might try to undo that. What are your biggest concerns when it comes to net neutrality in particular?
Well, I think the last 3 years have demonstrated beyond a doubt that our decision was the correct one. When we made it, there were all kinds of hyperbolic predictions from politicians, from special interest groups, from tech companies. And this is the end of the internet as we know it. You're going to get the internet one word at a time. You'll have to pay $15 per month just to be able to tweet. But now, fast forward over 3 years, the internet is twice as fast as it was in terms of fixed broadband speeds 3 years ago. Same with the wireless speeds, have gone up dramatically. A huge increase in capital expenditures to build these internet infrastructures, and millions more Americans have access to the internet than ever before. And so I think their decision was the correct one. And moreover, the entire debate about net neutrality has now been obscured, I think, by the debate over the tech giants. Some of the advocates who are strongly opposed to our decision because they fear that it would allow network operators to censor speech they don't like are now turning around and demanding that internet companies censor speech that they don't like. So that intellectual incoherence that we see among certain advocates for net neutrality, I think is going to have to be reconciled. And to me, it should be reconciled by Congress, putting on the page the basic principles of an open internet that we all agree on. No blocking, no throttling, no anti-competitive conduct, transparency. I've just described in 10 seconds a bill that should pass 99-1 in the Senate, but we'll see how things shake out.
So Color of Change is urging President-elect Biden to choose Jeffrey Starks, Black Democratic member of the FCC, to be your successor. Any insight on who your next successor should be, and do you have any advice for that person?
Well, I don't know who it will be. I, of course, have tremendous esteem for Commissioner Starks. And not only have we worked well together, establishing things like the Early Career Staff Diversity Initiative to get more underrepresented communities into the FCC's workforce, but also he hails from my home state of Kansas and he's a Chiefs fan. So I think there would be some nice continuity there. But more seriously, whoever the next chair is, the advice I would give him or her is to chart the course that you want to chart in terms of the public interest, and then work very hard to leverage the FCC's best asset, which is its staff, to achieve that. As I said, I stand willing and able to help in any way I can. I'll be rooting for their success. I truly believe that these issues are nonpartisan in nature. And it's a challenging job, no doubt about it, but there are also tremendous rewards too, in terms of delivering for the American people. And I hope that the next chair will be able to do that.
All right, well, it could be quite a proud moment for Kansas. We will be watching. FCC Chair Ajit Pai, congratulations on wrapping up your tenure, and thank you so much for sharing some of your parting thoughts with us. All right, coming up, Parler partially returns, now relying on a Russian-owned web security service after being ousted by heavyweights like Amazon, Apple, and Google. We will have the very latest. And President-elect Biden is participating in an event on the National Mall this evening to remember the 400,000 Americans who died from COVID-19. There are 400 lights that'll be featured in the reflecting pool near the Lincoln Memorial. A moment of silence will be coming up at the bottom of the hour. We will take you there when that happens. This is Bloomberg. Parler, the social network popular with the alt-right and conspiracy theorists, reappears with the help of a Russian-owned web security service. The website was dropped by big tech companies after it was used by members to incite violence at the U.S. Capitol. For more, I want to bring in Sarah Fryer, who covers Facebook, Instagram, and social media for us. So, Sarah, Parler isn't back, but they do appear to have a new web hosting service, which would take the place, right, of Amazon Web Services?
Right. So basically, they are able to get their website functioning, and they're using the same helper as Gab got after a similar ban following the Charlottesville riot, the Epic Systems. And their IP is also provided by a Russian firm that protects sites from DDoS attacks. So they are not fully functional. If you go to their website, it's not like you get the full social network back, and it's going to be a while before we see maybe similar levels of activity there. The thing, though, is they're not back in the Apple App Store or the Google App Store, and that's really where you can build an audience if you're trying to build a social network. You're not going to be able to do it so well with just a website.
Apple or Google given any update as to whether Parler can in fact return? I know they've said they need better moderation policies, better systems in place before that could ever happen.
I don't think they're going to entertain the possibility until after the inauguration, and of course you would need that moderation. But if Parler implements those stricter content policies and tries to make sure that nobody's instigating violence or denying the results of the election or anything like that, then are they still the free speech network that's drawing all these conservatives who are frustrated with Twitter and Facebook? I mean, that was their main selling point. So I think they're still in a really tough spot, despite the fact that they've been able to get their website up.
And as we head into Inauguration Day, what is the latest you're hearing from Facebook and Twitter about how they are, keeping an eye out for potential violence, potential gatherings being planned tomorrow? We have about a minute left.
They're playing a game of whack-a-mole. Facebook says it's taking down posts that say "Stop the Steal." They're trying to take down any militant groups. Of course, you still see them crop up. You still see instances of people driving a lot of this conversation. So I think they're just going to have to be extremely vigilant up through tomorrow and maybe even beyond.
All right. Well, we are all on guard, and I know you're watching both networks closely. Our Sarah Fryer, thank you so much for that update. All right. Coming up, America Wednesday will welcome a new president into the White House as the inauguration is set in Washington. And hopefully, a peaceful transition of power ahead. We will preview what's to come next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. We are monitoring the National COVID Memorial happening right now in Washington, D.C. to remember the 400,000 Americans whose lives have been lost due to COVID-19. You're looking at President-elect Joe Biden there, along with his wife, Jill Biden. And we know that this is one of the things that President-elect Biden really wanted to do, one of the first things he wanted to do as he takes office. You're looking at shots of the Washington Monument there just after sunset over the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. There are 400 lights around the pool that will be illuminated to remember these 400,000 Americans who have died as a result of COVID-19. And of course, the president-elect awaits a big test as he prepares to take office. He has promised 100 million vaccines to mark his first 100 days in office. It is a tall order, as we know. Vaccines have been in short supply. There are cities across the country clamoring for more. The rollout, the process has been very slow moving and very difficult. And the president-elect, President soon-to-be, President Biden, has a big task ahead. We did hear from President Trump earlier today. He released a video message as he prepares to leave office. Normally we'd see that in a nationally televised address, but instead this was a video message that he released where he acknowledged that there would be a new administration, but never said President Biden's name by name. I want to take a listen to a sound bite from the president's message. Let's listen in. Actually, we're going to head back to Joe Biden now, who is speaking at the Washington Monument. Let's take a listen.
They're all nurses. We know from our family experience what you do, the courage and the pain you absorb for others. So thank you. Thank you. Your Eminence, Cardinal Gregory, and Yolanda Adams, to heal, we must remember It's hard sometimes to remember, but that's how we heal. It's important to do that as a nation. That's why we're here today. Between sundown and dusk, let us shine the lights in the darkness along the sacred pool of reflection. Remember all whom we lost.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. But you don't really care for music, do you? It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall and the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I know that there's a God
Song
above.
on the National Mall as President-elect Biden and his wife Jill Biden remember the 400,000 Americans who've lost their lives to COVID-19. This was one of the very first things that President-elect Biden wanted to do before he took office, and he's got a big task ahead to make sure that 100 million vaccines are delivered to Americans in his first 100 days in office. That has been his promise, but how will he deliver? Meantime, President Trump, who will be president for just a few more hours now, released a farewell address earlier today via video. Let's take a quick listen to that.
This week, we inaugurate a new administration and pray for its success in keeping America safe and prosperous. We extend our best wishes, and we also want them to have luck.
President Trump will not attend tomorrow's inauguration, but Vice President Mike Pence has indicated he will be there. Even though President Trump railed against the election results over the last few months, he struck a conciliatory tone in that message. Let's listen for more. 19 quite striking shots of Washington, D.C. at sunset. I want to bring in our Emily Wilkins, who has been following the president-elect as he prepares to take office tomorrow. Emily, from what you know, will tomorrow's transition of power be a peaceful one?
You know, that is something that a lot of people in this city are preparing for. We have 25,000 National Guard troops here. The entire center of the city has been basically locked down. I mean, there are military vehicles everywhere you look. I went down to the Capitol today. There's a 7-foot fence topped with barbed wire around it. Every precaution is really being taken here to make sure that tomorrow's inauguration goes smoothly. But we have been hearing from a number of online groups and individuals who say that we're motivated by storming the Capitol on January 6th and see tomorrow as an opportunity for round two.
So, are we 100% sure that President Trump will not have a change of heart and show up at the inauguration tomorrow?
You know, I think anyone who's tried to play the guess what Trump will do game over the last 4 years has often found themselves on the losing side of that. At this point, President Trump's plan is to board a flight tomorrow morning, go down to Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where he now plans to reside. However, Vice President Mike Pence is expected to be at the inaugural for Joe Biden.
Now, let's talk about the state of security at the Capitol. I mean, we've seen this footage of the National Guard on Capitol Hill. It's obviously a big day. There have been warnings about violence. We don't know exactly where the threats stand, given the actions that have been taken over the last several days to get some control of it. What can you tell us about the state of security right now in Washington?
This is really unlike any other inauguration that we've seen before. I mean, living in D.C., you are used to certain levels of security for big events. This is something completely different. I mean, I mentioned earlier that 25,000 National Guard troops. To give everyone some sense of scale, that is 5 times as many troops as we currently have in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think a lot of lawmakers were really thrown off guard by what happened when a pro-Trump mob sieged at the Capitol 2 weeks ago. And so there was already going to be heightened security for this event. And then after that, it's just been bolstered up even more so. There are lots of precautions that the city is taking to make sure that tomorrow is safe. There's been lots of parts of the city that have closed down. Metro stops, just streets that are usually teeming with people are just completely inaccessible and are going to be remaining inaccessible for all of tomorrow.
All right, Bloomberg's Emily Wilkins. Obviously, all eyes on January 20th. We will be checking in with you and, of course, be following the events of tomorrow. Well, it has been a big day in the world of electric cars. Cruise raising $2 billion from its biggest existing backer, General Motors, and Microsoft. The deal putting the company closer to a commercial robo-taxi service. And the EV startup Rivian raised almost $3 billion. The round gives the company an eye-watering valuation. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow joins us now on both. Let's start with GM. Ed, give us your analysis of what this means.
Yeah, GM shares up big on that news. You know, the read from Wall Street is that the company is really positioning itself for a future where transport changes. On the consumer standpoint, they've invested really heavily in electric vehicles that consumers will one day buy. But on the autonomous vehicle side, they've invested heavily in Cruise. Across the two, it's going to be something like $27 billion worth of investment. The partnership with Microsoft adds that data angle. If you think about Waymo and Alphabet, they have a cloud relationship as well as a financial relationship. Zoox and Amazon, another cloud relationship. So the Microsoft deal gives Cruise access to a cloud platform. You know, autonomous vehicles are essentially computers on wheels. They generate so much data locally, but the ambition for so many is to operate this robo-taxi service, something like an Uber and a Lyft where that you use autonomous shuttles. All of that takes management, you know, sending these AVs to and from the right place, making sure that you have a consumer-facing platform that can be hailed over the phone using a mobile app. And so that's why so much importance today has been given to this deal between GM, Microsoft, and Cruise.
So how does this potentially change or accelerate the coming change in the hierarchy of EVs? I mean, we've been having the conversation for the last few weeks. It seems to be Tesla and everything else, everyone else. You know, does this give a new entrant significantly more dry powder, or is it still going to be a while?
You know, it definitely gives the cash injection. You forget that autonomous vehicles are capital-intensive exercises. You need a lot of testing, a lot of talent in terms of data and engineering to bring it to life. But remember, Cruise said that they were going to have a robo-taxi fleet in the real world by the end of 2019. Yet here I am sitting beginning of 2021, and I don't see a robo-taxi fleet on streets anywhere. So we're still some way away, and a big part of that is regulation. Here in California, other states around the United States, other countries outside of the United States. It's pretty dependent on regulators giving the green light for these companies to actually deploy in the real world. But that is what they're, you know, all of these companies are working on. They've put a lot of effort into demonstrating the tech works, but until they get regulator approval, an everyday person, a consumer, won't be getting one in the real world on public roads.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. Ed, thank you so much for that update. We will, of course, stay in close touch with your reporting on all of this. Okay, coming up, salaries. Tech jobs are dominating the demand picture, and companies are not afraid to dangle big money in front of prospective employers. We're going to take a look at the talent market in the tech sector next. This is Bloomberg. Against a backdrop of widespread economic disruption, the tech sector has stood out to be much less impacted than others. The recruiting agency Randstad predicts that demand for tech workers will only increase and the war for top talent will heat up throughout this coming year. In a recent study, Randstad found that compensation is king, with 63% of all employees saying they would accept a role elsewhere with a higher pay. For more now, we are joined by Tracy Fiat, Randstad CEO of Professional and Commercial Staffing. Tracy, thank you so much for joining us. So what are the trends you see in 2021? What's next?
Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, it certainly is a dynamic and fluid labor force and workforce out there, but there are some things that are absolutely certain. First of all, the pandemic has absolutely accelerated digital transformation across every industry out there. And as a result, what we're seeing is a massive increase for the need of both technology people, as well as then all of the ability to be agile in those workplaces. The other thing that has come along with that digital transformation, of course, is the ability to work from home by sectors that normally hadn't. And because of that, it has actually proven to increase productivity. More than 55% of companies have seen an increase in productivity and work from home when they expected it to decline, especially in places that weren't accustomed to it. Because of that increase in productivity, and because we have found that many roles can be done from home that we thought could not, 76% of surveyed people by a Stanford study showed that forever they want to stay in a hybrid model, that going back to the office full time is not something that the majority of workers want. So what does that mean for the tech sector? What it means is that the companies that are thriving and are fluid have infrastructure and the ability and the tools for their employees to work from home.
You have been looking closely at salaries. What are you seeing? How much does the money matter these days?
You know, you said it at the very beginning, cash is king. There are a couple of key shifts that we're seeing because of this new era that we're in. Number one, both employees now have a wider pool of job opportunities because you can look at positions that aren't necessarily in your backyard, and employers now have a wider net of a talent pool that they might have closed off previously. But what we are finding is you've heard a lot about the K economy or the bifurcated economy where you've got those roles that are in demand. What we're seeing is anywhere between 2.5% and 3% increase in salaries for these in-demand jobs. Now, the downside is that the lowest wage jobs, that many have disappeared and never to come back. So for the majority of what we're seeing in these high demand jobs, salaries are going up and people are expecting it. The other thing, however, is benefits. So the benefits that are now very widely and becoming more and more common, a couple of things. One of the largest financial institutions, for example, is offering $100 a day in childcare reimbursement, the ability to have flexible schedules, the ability to have ergonomic chairs and multiple monitors provided by your company so that you can work from home. So in addition to the salary increases for those in-demand jobs, you're also seeing some creative and benefits provided to employees in order to work in this new era.
Right. This is totally uncharted territory. And you've got a lot of companies out there saying, look, we're supportive. If you want to work elsewhere, you can. We will support you. That said, you also found that workers are increasingly anxious and actually have a lot of anxiety, despite the fact that maybe their boss has said it's all going to be okay. And obviously we're not having the amount of FaceTime, the same number of check-ins that we would if we just saw people in the office. So how do we address that?
Well, I think it's such uncertain times outside of our work lives that help exacerbate that. Employee engagement was at an all-time high pre-COVID. And so that's hard to compete with. It was one of the most robust unemployment eras that we had seen. What we're finding, though, is that the companies who provide the tools that allow for open communication, you're seeing almost every single industry now using technology to do things like virtual interviewing, virtual job fairs, happy hours. So it comes back to the original discussion that we were having about technology and the robustness of it and the companies that are thriving. The companies that are thriving are using technology to get the work done, to increase the satisfaction and engagement of their employees, as well as to make people feel comfortable.
All right, Randstad CEO of Professional and Commercial Staffing, Tracy Fiat, thanks so much for sharing your outlook with us, all trends we will be watching. Okay, coming up, we will get back to those Netflix results and talk about the subscriber growth, the company's focus on original content. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Netflix out with a blockbuster earnings report, the stock popping in after-hours trading, the latest results pushing total subscribers above 200 million. The company also announcing that free cash flow could rise close to break even this year. Joining us to discuss, we're joined by Brian Weiser of Group M. Brian, of course, that's significant because Netflix has spent a lot of money to make all this original content, and now it finally seems to be paying off. What are the highlights here for you?
Yeah, I thought that certainly the spending on content, although not a shocker, still $12 billion for the year is still a stunning amount of money when you think about it. That is probably the more important thing for people to focus on. We know they're going to grow their subscribers. It's just a question of how important are they going to be and how much are they going to drive the rest of the industry to continue an arms race of spending on content.
Now, Andre Swanston of True Optic joined us earlier in the show, and he thinks that Netflix hasn't really done anything radical in the last couple of years. Sure, they're pushing out a lot of original content, but since making the bet on doing original content at all, they haven't ventured into new lines of business, for example. He's suggesting gaming or audio or even getting into advertising, which Netflix has said they wouldn't do. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I saw the statement earlier, and Andre's built a fantastic business of his own. I strongly disagree on that. I think the very fact that Netflix has managed to build such a robust lineup of content, I estimate they account for around 10% of all viewing in the United States of people under the age of 50. 10% of viewing. That crushes anything Blockbuster ever did.
That is incredible. Agreed. Who do you think are the most threatening competitors? Netflix has always said we love competition. Who should they be watching out for?
Well, the world is out there to be reinvented, and it's really just a function of how much a given network group wants to spend on original content. So Viacom, for example, if they chose to spend another $10 billion or $15 billion on original content for Paramount Plus, they could have Netflix viewing levels, but the reality is most network groups won't, right? So I think that that's the real issue. When Warner Media announced what they did with respect to the HBO arrangement on Warner Brothers, that was a big deal. That gets them to a seat at the table. But I think you need to see network groups spending, tens of billions of dollars on content. And if they do, they can compete aggressively with Netflix.
So, look, we've got about a minute left. What are you going to be watching for this year when it comes to the streaming wars?
Yeah, well, that spending metric is all certainly key. I think that will, Comcast, for example, actually put a budget up there for Peacock. Will Discovery actually say they want to be a player and say they want to spend billions of dollars? And they realize that, in fact, people do want Ferraris, not SUVs, when it comes to their streaming services. Will AT&T continue to support what will be probably a money-losing proposition, if the right one for the long term? Will those things happen? That's what I'm looking for.
Right. And will there be consolidation to come? Because certainly they can't all survive at this rate. Brian Weiser of Group M, always good to have you on the show. Brian, thank you so much for stopping by. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology, Bloomberg Daybreak Asia. Coming up next, tomorrow we will be all about the inauguration as President-elect Joe Biden takes office. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.